Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you today. The topic I've got today is nurturing the service research community. And as Wafa has mentioned, I have been involved in the service research community from the earliest days, and I'm going to be sharing some of that with you. So let me get right to a key starting slide. Here's a slide with the heading, Escaping Mental Slavery. It's part of the lyrics to a song, Redemption Song by Bob Marley, a great reggae musician who's long gone. The phrase that I'm sharing is, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. The whole song is wonderful. I got to teach in Jamaica for several years as part of an executive program, and the Jamaican students were delighted that I could quote reggae songs to them and that I really, really love this song like they do. To the Jamaicans, this song is nearly a national anthem because it speaks to an important truth. The Jamaican people were once enslaved by the British, and once they were free, Bob Marley's raising the next issue. You're not free until you're free of mental slavery too. So that none but ourselves can free our minds, I think, is a powerful, powerful phrase. So now to the topics for today. First is becoming Homo sapiens. The second topic I have for you is the growth of the service research community, followed by cultivating wiser research about humanity, and then the need for nurturing the service research community, and then designing wiser institutions that serve humanity. Then number 6 is designing for the full spectrum of human experience, and then designing services to include all of humanity. Number 8 there is designing technology that serves humanity safely. Number 9 is service research themes for serving humanity. And I finish up with 10 next steps for nurturing the service research community. And I should comment on the photo of the giraffe and the giraffe baby there. I went looking for a photo with the keyword nurturing. It showed me lots of pictures of women and babies, but I really thought this was sort of even more fun because animals have babies too, and nurturing is evolutionarily desirable across, especially mammals. It's very important. So my first topic then is becoming Homo sapiens, and I should pause on that phrase, Homo sapiens. That's our scientific name that we gave ourselves. I think it was an aspirational name. I don't think we really are Homo sapiens yet. It would be nice if we were, but I don't think we are yet. And the reason is because of human ignorance. Human ignorance is actually our beginning state. Ignorance is our natural condition of every human child. Every one of us is born not knowing how to walk, not knowing how to talk, and there's a lot more. And because we start with ignorance, our education and extended childhoods are how we cope with our ignorance. We have to learn to cope through education and long childhoods. It takes time, in fact, more time than ever, as we've gotten into this late stage of human successes and failures. The next issue then is that education is an investment in human potential. As education systems have improved, human potential has improved. Knowledge used to be very difficult to share, but now it's very easy to share. It used to be things like papyrus, stone tablets. You needed a lot of technology that you don't need today. We can do what I'm doing now. We can share knowledge visually across the internet. It's so easy to do these things today. Unfortunately, ignorance is easier to share too, which undermines progress because ignorance can confuse people when they don't know for sure what to believe, what not to believe. Nonetheless, wisdom is hard to share. It's very difficult to share because it takes time. Knowledge and ignorance don't take much time. Wisdom has to be fully absorbed to really be shared. And here's a photo from my childhood. I was 15 when this photo was taken in 1968. It's often called Earthrise. It was a photo from astronauts orbiting the moon, taking a picture of Earth in the distance. It often later was called Spaceship Earth. And here's my thought experiment idea to the right there. How would humanity behave if we understood the full meaning of this photo? A lot of people talked about that full meaning back then. They talked about the issue of that's the only place in the universe that life exists. And that's still today true. We don't know of life anywhere else. The question is there intelligent life on this planet? It's not clear to me intelligent life is on this planet yet. We're not quite there. But to me, why didn't 1968 transform humanity? The Earth environmental movement, Earth Day, and lots of other things started in 68. So a lot of people got it, but not enough of us got it. But if you think back to 1968, which I realize for the rest of you is really hard, but back in 1968, it wasn't even possible for a huge portion of humanity to see that photo until many, many years later. So a lot of humanity never knew, and that's part of our ignorance problem. Here's my favorite quote about the problems we have as humans. It's from E.O. Wilson, a sociobiologist, a very famous sociobiologist. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Now, let me go back on those three. So our emotions are evolved emotions from way back in our ancestral evolution. And we still use those same emotions because you can't simply change the emotional wiring of the human brain. And our brains evolved emotionally first. That's true for all life, by the way. Emotions drive brain development. And then we got to something that is much more impressive versus other mammals, the prefrontal cortex. But we're still emotional creatures first. Then the medieval institutions. We're stuck with the institutions that are from medieval times, and they're often lagging behind what humans really need. And the last part is the messiest part, what he called godlike technologies. Technologies that can put people out there orbiting the moon. And technologies like the internet, technologies like AI and all those other things that often go faster than humans are ready to fully understand and cope with it. So I also need to tell you that 1968 is when I changed. 1968 changed me. Because it was not that photo, but it was the other things that happened in 68 that changed me. There were many, many political problems. There were assassinations that were politically motivated. There were many, many political problems, not just in the United States, but in the rest of the world. There were also many military problems, including the Vietnam War. And at 14, when I first got to be thinking about it earlier in that year, I was alarmed to fully understand that I was going to be sent to Vietnam as a soldier once I was old enough to be sent. That they had a draft, they were going to send people. Very alarming. But I became convinced that unfairness should become my personal quest, and that has been my quest ever since, because I became obsessed with the idea of seeking to solve for fairness. So I decided I needed to do something about it. I needed to find a way to work on fairness. The tools I knew I needed was education so that I would have the ability to work on it. So I headed off to college. I got 3 business degrees in 9 years, finishing with a marketing PhD at Arizona State University in 1980. My dissertation was about the fairness of service and airline services, to be exact. So my research from the beginning, service research, service history, service theater, service design, and in the last a little more than 10 years, serving humanity has been my focus. I also was convinced I needed to know how to lead things. So I've been a department chair of marketing departments 2 different times, a grand total of 23 years, and I was founder of CeRCLe in 1993. I'll come back to CeRCLe with a little more soon. And then 50 years after 1968 is when I announced that I was going to start CeRCLe, and I'll touch on that later too. But one other thing about 68, just after that I need to tell you about. This wise advice from my high school English teacher, a guy by the name of John Harrington. I had written a free verse essay. We could write whatever we wanted in an essay. And I was feeling very pessimistic as a result of everything that had happened in 68. And so I wrote this super depressing essay, super pessimistic. And he wrote on the back of that essay, the quote that I show you there, everyone has 2 choices in life, optimism or pessimism. What advantage do you find in pessimism? I've emulated his teaching method ever since then when I became a teacher, because he didn't tell me how to think. He asked me to think about what I had written in a way that I had not thought about it. The question, what advantage do you find? So I thought about it and thought about it. I couldn't find a single advantage. It only made me depressed, and what was the point of that? So that's when I became what I ever since have called a learned optimist. I didn't find optimism easy. I found it because pessimism sucks. It's better to be someone who is optimistic and viewing their life as I can do something. I can try to make a difference. That was very motivational, and very motivational for me later when I taught. So, second topic then, growth of the service research community. Again, I got to be there at the beginning. And at the beginning, service research emerged because of unsolved service problems. Lynn Shostak was inspirational. Her article from 1977, Breaking Free from Product Marketing, that was in the Journal of Marketing my very first semester in the PhD program. And I read it from word to word, from front to back. And I realized that she was right, because I had 2 prior marketing degrees. I was convinced that she was exactly right, that the marketing training she received did not prepare her to understand services. And I'm from Las Vegas. That's the other reason I was convinced she's right. Now, I don't really consider Las Vegas a service system. I consider most of things like gambling a disservice. But I was convinced she was right. And there were 3 significant characteristics of all of us that became part of that early field. We had a lot of practitioners and a lot of academics both interacting. Very interdisciplinary orientation, especially management and marketing, and it was international from the beginning. I got to meet people like Everett Gumas and Christian Grunrose, Christopher Lovelock, that were some of the early people with very international backgrounds. That was very, very, very important to me, because I was a person who had never been out of the country in any meaningful way at that point. And I got to understand from them how they thought about things. Later, in 1993, I wrote with Mary Jo Bittner and Steve Brown an article that we called Tracking the Evolution of the Service Research Field. And here's the evolution we tracked across the early pre-80s, because there was research like Lynn Shostak's article before 1980. We called it Crawling Out. And then from there forward, everything and the rest of it was scurrying about, where we thought this was a really important, really busy time. And we're using an evolutionary biological metaphor. So if you think about this story of evolution, all life that is on the land crawled out of the ocean, and the scurrying about is sort of a reference to some of our ancestral monkey-type ancestors, the scurrying about stage. And then we were convinced that already by 1985, we had begun to walk erect as a field, a very rapid transformation. And Mary Jo and Steve had also been part of that effort. We were all deeply involved. It was an observer, a participant observer story. That was a really fun article to write, where the 3 of us had a great time. So I started CeRCLe in 1993. Now, that article I just told you about was published in 1993. Part of the reason I knew I was the right guy to start CeRCLe is I had the email addresses of all the people we had written about. If they had an email address, I had their address. So I contacted all those people that had been in the article and said, I'm going to start CeRCLe. Can you help? And because they already knew me, they said yes. So yes, yes, yes across that. So it was all because the American Marketing Association had decided that it was possible to create special interest groups. And I had been vocal in the AMA saying, you're leaving out important topics. So the moment I saw the announcement, I announced to these people that I could email that I was going to start CeRCLe, as I called it. And I deliberately left out American Marketing Association. I deliberately left out just marketing. I just called it CeRCLe because I wanted to think big. In my life, thinking bigger has always been my hope, to try to think about problems in a bigger way. So we held, oops, I'm skipping one. I wrote 3 goals for the, I only take credit in CeRCLe for 2 things, the name and these 3 goals, open, flexible, and fun. I was convinced if the organization could be open, flexible, and fun, we could really make a difference. And there was a first opportunity to do an organizational meeting at the Frontiers Conference in 1993. That was the second conference. And we were off and running. Our doctoral consortium began planning at that very first meeting. One of the people in the audience said we should do something like a consortium. I asked her if she would start it for us, and she did. Lynn forgot her last name all of a sudden, but she promised to do it. And there we have it. We've got the doctoral consortium ever since. Later, I wrote about the next stage of service evolution with Steve Grove. This we used a social evolution metaphor for. We talked about making tools after the previous stage from 1992 forward to about 2000. Then we talked about creating language, more of the language from 2000 forward. That included things like service dominant logic that came out then, service science that came out then, and changing the service language. And we were convinced at 2010, we were convinced that the next stage needed to be building community. We were trying to predict the future. I love trying to predict the future by my learned optimism approach to predicting the future, to try to make things happen. And instead of sitting around and Somebody should do something about that. I try to be the guy that says, hey, let's work on this together and make it happen. So in 2018, at ServSig's 25th anniversary, I reviewed the 25-year history of CeRCLe in a plenary session that I was asked to do because I'd been there from the whole time. And I announced to the group that I was convinced that we were large enough as a group. Our service research community was large enough that we could go to the next level and that I was going to help take us there. I was starting CeRCLe, and CeRCLe's focus was on human problems, not just the membership problems. ServSig, by its rules, can only serve the research community. CeRCLe, by its rules, can serve humanity because that's the way I designed it. So by now, we actually put that in the CeRCLe name as serving humanity through collaboration. And the mission is to serve humanity through research collaborations that catalyze reducing suffering, improving well-being, and enabling well-becoming. The transformative service research link is in the middle of that. As I've worked on CeRCLe with other people like Sertan, we've added the edges. So we've added reducing suffering and enabling well-becoming. So a little bit to wrap up this section of the service research field. Dave Bowen and I led a team effort to collect all of us that are still alive from the early days of service research into an article that we call Learning from the Pioneering Founders of the Service Research Field. That came out last year. And if you don't know those names in service research, you should. I won't try to read them all and tell you all about it. But there are 12 of us that are still alive. In the article, we acknowledge the ones who didn't make it. For example, Everett Gumison passed away shortly before we finished this article. And at the very last sentence of the article says, service interactions are essential for human progress, so there will always be new opportunities for new service research and new service researchers. I'm an optimist. There are great opportunities, and I'm going to be focusing on some of those opportunities. But one last idea from that article. This was early in the article. We had this idea that I had stumbled on this book called The Good Ancestor. And in The Good Ancestor, the premise of the book, Roman Krznarik's premise was that based on Jonas Salk. Jonas Salk is famous for developing the first successful polio vaccine and for patenting the technology because he wanted to be, not patenting rather, he did not patent it, never patented it. He wanted to be of some help to mankind. And according to Roman Krznarik, in later years, Salk expressed his philosophy of life in a single question: are we being good ancestors? I really liked that question, so I told Dave Bowen about it. He liked it a lot. We shared it with the rest of the team, and that became part of the introduction to our article. That we thought that fit pretty well what all of us who didn't realize we were going to be ancestors of service research, that was part of what we did. We were trying to help and move things forward. So, third topic then, cultivating wiser research about humanity. This is a recent article from this year on cultivating wiser research. You can see my name as the fifth name on the list. There are 2 marketing professors and 2 management professors in this group. Edie and Sophia are the management professors. Uri and Janan are the marketing professors. And I'm the service scholar in the group, the old timer in the team. We've worked on this project at a Fordham event that the Sertan started. And we quickly ended up focusing on wiser communication, and then it became cultivating wiser service systems. So I'm going to share a little from that idea. So in that front part of the article, we looked at 4 major service research threads, and they emerged and converged in the 21st century. And those were service dominant logic, service science, service design, and transforming service research. And the compression of those that I was doing, I have to mention that I wrote that part because I was the only service researcher in the group, and it was going to be, if we succeeded, in the Journal of Service Management. So basically the idea was that each of those 4 challenged previous thinking about the nature of service, the nature of exchange, the scope of service, the design of service, and the purpose of service research. All of those were making challenged approaches. And they were also interwoven. They converged on the perspective of profound generalizability. The phrase I have often used is that they climbed the ladder of service system complexity. Service dominant logic views all human interactions as service interactions, which I agree with completely. I think that's a great logic, and it really helps us think harder and better when we think of it that way. Service science views all human organizations in service systems. To me, both of those things made the service research field very wise. The service design field adds a new layer of wisdom because it views all service systems and their interactions as opportunities to design or redesign the system. So it's not just, well, now we know what it is. Oh, well, we can change it. And then TSR, Transforming Service Research, the newest of those four, builds on those threads and adopts a scholarly activist perspective to solve complex problems in service systems. And again, you can see that same phrase that is from the CeRCLe mission statement: reducing suffering, enabling well-becoming, and right in the middle, improving well-being. So here's the synthesis that we put in that article, CeRCLe's synthesis of these issues. That humanity has always lived in service systems, and many service systems are not serving humanity well. Now, most humans don't know that first premise. They know the second one. They know they're not being served well. That's part of the reason the votes turned out the way they did 2 days ago. Because some people thought, well, I'm not getting what I should. I'm mad. I'm not being served well. The third part is that we should design service systems that serve humanity wisely. It goes back to the institutional issues, and we'll be touching on institutions shortly. So, another key idea, and this is from an article that Sertan and I and Radula and Kareem wrote together, but it was building off of the foundational article for CeRCLe, in which in that article we had this 4 hierarchies idea in a spreadsheet, left to right, 4 interactions. But when the 4 of us on the piece that Sertan and I worked on, when we worked on it, we were discussing there's a missing logic, and that is that this is really more of a hierarchy. The bottom, where you see on the conflict part, the bottom is the worst possible interactions because people can die. And we know that to be always true. And certainly people are dying in Gaza. They're dying in Ukraine as I am speaking. So conflict is still with us as the worst possible human interaction. We have never, as a species, escaped that. The next one is better. Competition is better. But notice we've got this sort of steep slope because competition frequently degenerates into conflict. And that's been true worldwide. And cooperation is better, and we've got more of a flat slope there because cooperation is not always that much better than competition. And the problem with cooperation is that sometimes people are just going along with things they don't like, but it's better than trying to fight over it. So they're putting up with things that are less than desirable. The top level gets to shared purpose, and that's collaboration. That's the mutualism idea that you can see in the slide. So in biology, biologists have looked at all life forms, and they classify them from parasitic to mutualism and all kinds of things in between. For us as humans, we think those are the 4 interactions. So CeRCLe's name has collaboration in it, and that's why it was in that foundational article. This tries to improve it by focusing on the hard climb for our species, wisely to climb to collaboration. Not easy, but wisdom's never easy would be my argument. Wisdom's never easy. Now I'm going to reference a book that I have almost finished reading. It's one of my brand new favorite books written by Jeremy Lent, The Web of Meaning. And here's just one quote from it. In a complex system, the ways in which things connect are frequently more important than the things themselves. I could spend an hour just telling you more about this book. This book is wonderful. For those of you in the audience that are PhD students, this is one of the books I'm going to mention today that could really help you think differently about what you might do with your research. Because he does a very, very high-level analysis of what's wrong with humanity as it's processing things and what we are missing, what we could do better. And boy, do I like his ideas, which is why I'm sharing that with you. So he's talking about connections, and of course in CeRCLe, we had talked about the connections, those 4 interactions. Now, another book that I can't recommend, even though I'd like to, is a book from Nicholas Maxwell. This is written for philosophers, his book on From Knowledge to Wisdom. It's a really hard read. There's an article that I'll be happy to share with you from 2007 that is a compressed version of most of his ideas. But since 1984, Nicholas Maxwell has been advocating for a philosophy of wisdom logic in universities. So here's the key quote. We need to bring about a major intellectual and institutional revolution in the aims and methods of inquiry, from knowledge inquiry to wisdom inquiry. When I discovered Nicholas Maxwell, I thought, oh man, I wish I had found him in 1984 when his book came out. I would have been a wiser person just because I'd found it sooner. He's right, I think. I think he's right that universities have seen knowledge as enough. And I don't think it is. I don't think knowledge is enough at all. So I talked to the rest of the CeRCLe lab officers, both the board of directors and people like Sertan and the other operations officers, and discussed it with them. So now our new theory of change is this: that service is our purpose, and service enables collaboration, which is our process that we see that humans need to be collaborating. So what CeRCLe Lab is trying to emulate what humans should do. And then the third part is that collaboration enables wisdom. Collaborating together makes us wise as a species. When you only have some people making decisions and other people are being left out, you make decisions that the some people think are wise and the other people think are stupid. Why? Because they never got included. Why wouldn't they think it's stupid if you don't include them? So the only way to get to collaborative wisdom is together. It's not easy, but that's the only way we get there. That's the only way we solve the problems of the world today. So the need for nurturing the service research community with this next topic. So first off, where are service researchers now? They're primarily in business schools still. There's modest numbers in other academic disciplines, but if you look at the disciplines, primarily in business schools, primarily marketing and management also, I should add, and primarily in Europe and Australia. Small numbers in other regions, and now I've left out North America. It makes me sad that I'm leaving out North America, but in North America, the number of service researchers is in decline. And Sertan and I both have talked about this in the past, that it's a frustrating thing there aren't more of us. I mean, every time I'm interacting with other parts of the world, in Europe and Australia in particular, there's so many of you working in service in Europe and so many working in Australia, which is exciting. But of course, the world is a big place and humans are everywhere in the world. And there are a lot of other disciplines. So to me, there's a lot more we need to be thinking about. We need to grow much larger. With more than 8 billion humans dispersed across our planet, the only place that I don't think we need to get too worried about Antarctica yet, or the North Pole yet, or maybe not Greenland. But the rest of the world, we should be really hoping that there'd be service researchers in the rest of the world. Because humans are widely dispersed, the service research, I would argue, should be widely dispersed. But right now, across the world, we have lots of incoherent human service systems. And in general, they're getting more incoherent. The United States is now officially, as of Tuesday, more incoherent. Germany, if you follow the news, Germany is more incoherent because they can't seem to get things to work out. And I can make a much longer list. And not only do we have the social disruptions, we've also got global climate disruptions, like what happened to Spain just a few weeks back. Massive flooding in Spain, and that's just one part of the world that's had flooding and problems. Research on human service systems is urgently needed, I think, everywhere in the world. If there are humans there, we need researchers there to figure out what could be done to improve it. And we need integrated service system research. By integrated, I mean across all the disciplines. It shouldn't just be a few disciplines. Any discipline that is facing humans in some way, I would argue, should be also interested in finding ways to work together. That would be a wisdom approach. Because we've only got one planet. We are one species, even though we fight with each other too often. We need to find ways of working together. One other key thing I need to share with you, one of my favorite analyses of all these problems, a woman by the name of Kate Raworth at Cambridge. She came up with a donut economics model. This is a book that I highly recommend to all of you too. She did a great analysis, reanalysis of economics, because economics is considered foundational to any business logic. She really rethought it. Great, great book. And so she came up with two problems, the public health shortfalls, and then the planetary health overshoots. In that one diagram, and she didn't do it alone, she worked with a lot of other people, but in that one diagram, she's captured all of the service system problems. The interactions with humans and the planet are problems that are service system related too. And there's the image of her book there. One more quote from Roman Krasnarek, and I should add, Roman Krasnarek and Kate Raworth are married. They must have fascinating dinner conversations together. Here's a quote from him about the planetary level ecological crisis, the same book that I've already told you about. We have never faced a planetary level ecological crisis before, so we simply don't know what impact it will have on the vast web of human organizations that have developed over the past 10,000 years. He doesn't know that it's service systems he's talking about because he's not aware of the service literature. But that phrase, we've never seen anything like it. So the uncertainties politically in Germany and the United States are trivial versus the planetary level ecological crisis. It's that crisis that is really our human problem, much greater than the local political problems. That gets me to designing wiser institutions. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. And institutions have been part of the service research field, and in fact, defined by the service dominant logic with this quote: institutions are humanly devised rules, norms, and beliefs that enable and constrain action and make social life predictable and meaningful. That's from Vargo and Lesch's book that they did in 2014, 10 years ago. So notice that human devised, it's all in our minds, basically. Institutions live in our minds because they believe they exist. It's a fascinating thing that we as a species have developed that ability to create institutions that live in our minds. It's wonderful and it's dangerous simultaneously. They include metaphors, languages, stories, myths, rituals, perspectives, ideas, cultures, laws, money, traditions, and service systems. Now, for us in service research, we typically have been focusing on service systems, which of course includes profit-seeking and service systems, natural human service systems like families and communities, and also government service systems, nonprofit service systems. But we don't do enough, I think, with all the other kinds of institutions that live in our mind. And in fact, CeRCLe is very interested in the topic of language in particular. But notice I've got two in green, so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about metaphors and money. But first I have to do this Yuval Harari quote. Yuval Harari, you may know the book Homo Deus, and this is a quote from him that captures what I just was saying about institutions. Corporations, monies, and nations exist only in our imagination. We invented them to serve us. Why do we find ourselves sacrificing our lives in their service? Profound quote, and he's right. If they only live in our minds, we could change our thinking. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery, remember? So, more on metaphors then. Our ordinary conceptual system, according to George Lakoff and Mark Johnson. This is an old book, 1980, but a powerful book on metaphors that I was fortunate to discover early in life. Our ordinary conceptual system is fundamentally metaphorical in nature. Our conceptual structures are what we perceive, how we get around in the world, and how we relate to other people. It's how we process. We process in metaphors. So here's two sets of metaphors to give you the contrast in terms of what's possible. Extractive metaphors still dominate much of human thought, like conquering nature. Now, I'm from out west, from Las Vegas and from Arizona, and winning the West was and still is, a popular way of thinking about it. Well, we're conquering this savage wilderness. Different one from business, shareholder value, which Milton Friedman gets the blame and credit for, depending on perspective, that maximizing shareholder returns is an organization's primary objective. Nothing about customers in that. It's just money, 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 profits, profits, profits. Both extractive, both focused on extraction. We need service metaphors to liberate human thought, such as serving each other, generously helping each other. That's been a key metaphor that I've tried to help share with people. But there's another metaphor that I think is very powerful, and that is serving it forward. The idea of being a good ancestor would capture what I mean by this, serving the next generations. That's the good ancestor idea right there. And then money. I have to say a little bit about money because business disciplines tend to be distracted by money. Our modern societies are organized around money. We invented money, but we often use money to mistreat each other. Yuval Harari in a TED Talk mentioned that money is the only story that everyone believes. Interesting and very cynical quote, but he said it's the only one everybody believes. Here's a quote from George Fisk. That is not my father, but a lot of people thought he was at least my grandfather because George Fisk was a marketing system scholar that I got to meet in 1979. And in a presentation shortly after that, he said that the wallet nerve is the most sensitive nerve in the human body. He was a very great presenter and a very humorous presenter. If you think about that metaphor of a wallet nerve, that explains the election 2 days ago in the United States. The people were tending to focus on, well, inflation's up, I'm mad about that, the wallet nerve. There doesn't seem to be a democracy nerve by comparison. It's the wallet nerve that made the decision in that election. And another thing I should add is the protests against institutions are not enough. And here's a picture of a protest for March for Our Lives protest in 2018. It was a student-led organization that leads demonstrations in support of gun control legislation. Started by students who, among those students were people who had survived a mass shooting at their school. The United States treats guns as part of the Second Amendment. It's virtually a religious sort of thing for some people. Guns, guns, guns. Changing that It's got to be the legislation. Protests alone won't change it. That's one of the most deeply embedded logics in American thinking. And people die at higher rates from gun violence than any other country in the world because it's deeply embedded. And I live in Texas, which is the state of the 50 with the highest per capita gun ownership. So I live in the most dangerous place in the world. Not my favorite part of living here. So, time for designing for the full spectrum of human experience. The full spectrum. This was the theme in our initial foundational article for CeRCLe, but I'm going to elaborate on it beyond what that article did. But here's first off the quote from it. What is human experience? So this, to serve humanity, CeRCLe seeks to elevate the human experience, which is our holistic concept for the totality of each person's experience with service systems as they seek to meet their basic needs across their life journey. That was not the way human experience has been talked in businesses. It's been customer experience. It's been employee experience. We thought we need to think bigger. Again, thinking bigger. So one of the ways you can think about it is private experiences like family roles and friends roles. Another way to think about it is public experiences. Business professors like me have typically focused on the public side, customer roles, employee roles. The private ones are non-monetary. We don't pay our friends. At least that's not a good way to have a friendship, of course. We know that. But the business ones, the public ones, have been monetary. But all of that's part of humanity. We tend to take things apart too much in studying humanity. What CeRCLe is trying to do is to help us put together the human again and think about the whole human with the whole human experience. And here's another way to think about the human experience that is not in that article at all, as one of the many things that came along later. That you can think of it as personal experience, the experience that only you know. Then there's social experience, the experience that you share with others. And then the external experience, your interactions with the external environment. All three are zones of experience. And all three matter. All the research shows that if you're having difficult personal experiences, it affects the rest of your life in many, many ways. Difficult social experiences can affect your life too. And if you don't get it out in nature enough, lots of research shows that we as a species need nature. We don't always act properly, but we need nature. The last point is the key point in blue. Social experience is the greatest challenge because that's where the institutions live. They live in the way we interact. That's where the problems come from. And here's another great book to recommend that for all of you among the PhD students. This book says in the subtitle, Why Science Cannot Ignore Human Experience. I discovered this book. It came out this year. It is a wonderful book. They dissect the science. Two of the authors are physicists. The other is a philosopher. So Evan Thompson, the last one, is a philosopher. Adam Frank and Glaser are physicists. So here's the quote. Turn the dial of experience away from the first person setting to a second person one. Experience is inherently intersubjective and shareable. That's the social part I was just talking about. Science would be impossible if this were not the case, they add. So they're convinced that many of these experiential things of humans are not being properly understood by science. And when I read this book, I kept saying, yay, as I was reading page after page, because I think they're right. They dissected economics also. So another quote from Jeremy Lent, in much the same way that we can cultivate ourselves, we can choose collaboratively to cultivate our society's flourishing. So he is thinking bigger too, about not just the connections, but how do those connections help our society flourish. So both of those books that I just mentioned, The Blind Spot and The Web of Meaning, are on the same kind of wavelength as CeRCLe's wavelength, the TSR wavelength, but they are not coming at it from the same disciplines. And this is part of my point, is that there are lots of other people who are interested in similar ideas, but they're looking at it from a different perspective. We need to combine these perspectives collaboratively. So, time for designing for service inclusion. That's an idea that I was participating in back in 2018. Here's the key quote from that article. We propose service inclusion as an egalitarian system that provides customers, patrons, clients, patients, etc., with fair access to services, fair treatment, and fair opportunity to exit. In other words, fully including everybody in the system. Lots of people are excluded all across the world in various parts of the world for various reasons. We shouldn't be leaving any humans out. It would be our logic. Later, in an article in 2023 in Journal of Service Research, different collaborators developed the phases of healing the digital divide, which we argued that if you want to really solve the problems of digital exclusion and to really include people, you need to go from enabling opportunities to building choices to nurturing healing and then fostering happiness. We need to make it possible for people to use technology. Lots of people on planet Earth are being left behind by technology. So that one is an expansion on service inclusion. And one other article is not directly about service inclusion. This is the hot off the press story for you today. This article that I'm referencing here, Marek Nadi-CeRCLe is the first author on that. He just posted on LinkedIn about 2 hours ago about it because we got it yesterday from Journal of Service Management. We proposed a set of service standards for all of humanity in terms of how should the service system serve humanity, starting with diversity at the bottom. And you'll notice that we call it the full spectrum of individual human differences, that every service system should serve those differences. That's the link to inclusion, including everybody. And in fact, to us, we think everyone has the right to be different. You were born different, you have the right to be different as far as we are convinced. And in fact, we view that as a biological aspect of the standards. Respect the diversity of humanity is the first one. Respect the dignity is the second one. And that is, as we describe it, is individually assessed well-being. Lots of people, if they are being allowed into the system, they're not being respected. And that's a commonplace problem as well. So we're saying any human service system should respect the dignity. And then the third part is agency, which we describe as the ability to make choices independently. Agency is the precious third part because that allows people to make their own life decisions. Lots of people never have that opportunity. Lots of people are trapped somehow. We wouldn't have to go very far to make a list of that, and I'll avoid doing that. But I should mention one other thing, because Kosai is in the room with you today, and Kosai and I are working on an expansion of wisdom cranes, more building from that logic. The crane idea was originally in the introductory article from CeRCLe. It's actually Daniel Dennett's idea of building ideas, building logic with metaphorically, a crane. So Marek and I grabbed it. We found a book on rules that became the inspiration for these 3 rules that we've got. Again, diversity, dignity, agency. Now, designing technology that serves humanity safely. Now, that word safely is critical here because we have lots of technology. Remember that phrase from E.O. Wilson, God-like technology? So technologies are very dangerous. Now, to tell you a personal story, which I rarely do, but it'll help you understand. In 1960, I was in a car crash that took out my hearing because my head hit the windshield. I had a brain concussion, scrambled my brain, and it took years for my brain to fully reorganize. I have never been able to hear from this ear since then. Why? Because the car I was in and my father was driving, it was an icy road, and another car came across and we crashed into a ditch and my head smashed against the windshield because I was on the seat opposite him. No seatbelts, because seatbelts had not been put in cars yet. I am a victim of unsafe technology. So that one is partially personal to me, that technology should be designed for safety. And it took a long time for proper safety features to be put in cars like airbags, battered child seats, etc. So that one, in fact, part of the reason I wanted to go off to school, I thought I was going to be a lawyer at first. I was going to be someone like Ralph Nader who'd worked on unsafe at any speed, because I understood what unsafe at any speed meant if you don't have a seatbelt. It means things like a concussion that can rearrange your head. So the role of human technology. Human technology can be used to help or harm humanity. That's always been true. It's always been true that the technology is in the hands of the user. The user is the issue. It's the human. AI can generate and spread fake news and propaganda at an unstoppable rate. That problem is one that we are experiencing now. People will be trying to figure out how much was the use of AI a factor in the election 2 days ago. And at this point, I doubt anybody has too many clues. And basically, automated technology is quite dangerous because it cannot experience fear or pain. If people want to think about the AI becoming conscious, highly unlikely, because it has no ability to experience emotions. Yes, it can imitate being conscious, But that's not the same. That is not the same as having real emotions. It's not the same at all. The last point there is, as the scale and complexity of technology increases, creating guardrails to safeguard humanity's future becomes essential. And I've deliberately used guardrails because that's one of the ways of making roads safer. We think of those as guardrails, so you aren't going to go off a cliff or something, or into a ditch, like happened in my case when I was a young boy. So one more slide on technology. All technology should be assistive. By assistive, I mean that it should help us as humans do something helpful, not something hurtful. I don't think guns are very helpful, especially handguns, because they're designed to kill, just to add to that one. Technology is often created to serve powerful people by exploiting other people or by extracting resources. Lots of times, technology invented by humans was used as military technology to kill people more efficiently. The most tragic example of that of all was the dropping of atomic bombs in Japan in 1945. The scale of that terrifies the world still today. So communication technologies massively expand the reach and speed of communication. And across all the technologies, from the telegram to the radio to the television to the satellites to the internet to computer technology to social media, handheld phones, artificial intelligence, all these various communication devices, all of them are communications. And the internet, social media, and artificial intelligence should be designed to assist humanity and not exploit humanity. But too often, we're being exploited. Social media is exploiting our identities, for example. And there's one last point I've got with the phrase filter bubbles. Filter bubbles are basically undermining things, because if you only have a filter bubble of who you interact with and you don't have any exposure to any other perspectives, you don't know the whole story about anything. Filter bubbles were not possible in my childhood. We had 3 television stations. It was only 3. So all these technologies and communications change that. Service research themes is my 9th topic for you. This is one that WAFA participated in, because with the topic here in the Journal of Services Marketing, we had a set of articles that I'm going to touch on in a moment. But it was partially inspired by an article quote from the 2020 founding article. And here's the quote: "Human life depends on planet Earth, so the service research field needs to respond by encouraging projects that balance serving human needs with serving the needs of future generations by protecting the fragile service ecosystem of planet Earth." So even though CeRCLe says serving humanity through collaboration, we wanted to plant that phrase in the article to point out that you also, if you're serving humanity, need to be concerned about the planet. The problems we have with global warming are because of humanity. It's our fault as humans that global warming is happening. So we need to serve humanity by getting our fellow humans to help fix that problem. So that was part of the motivation. Rebecca Russell Bennett and I talked about doing something with it. And so that inspired the set of 7 research themes that I'm showing on the screen now, which was a compression of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And Rebecca and I worked on that for quite a while. We were trying to get the smallest possible set, because 17 was a lot of things. And to us, in terms of what would be a good research topic, they overlapped quite a bit. So we ended up with well-being, opportunity, resources, economics, institutions, the planet, and what we call collaboration instead of what the United Nations called partnerships. That's the only one that we didn't compress. All the others we compressed with some of the other topics. And of course, it's not a surprise to you that since CeRCLe is part of this, the collaboration we thought needed to be part of it too. There's a series of articles that I'm sure WAFA can point everybody to if she hasn't already, because I'm so proud of this group in terms of what came out of each and every one of these articles, in terms of what was said about possible research topics. It's, to me, really one of the most exciting things CeRCLe has been able to do to encourage this activity, because I think it helps establish some key research areas in broader terms, again, thinking bigger, broader terms that I think can motivate research. And they are not, except for maybe economics, they're not that tied to disciplines. Whereas some of the prior stuff for the United Nations, it wasn't about disciplines, it was about governments, because the United Nations, that's why it was tied to governments. So, last out of the 10 topics for you, next steps for nurturing the service research community. So, I'm going to use that same visual you just saw for earlier, saw for experience, but I've substituted the word wisdom each time. 3 nested wisdom levels. And the wisdom needs to be nurtured at all 3 levels, and social wisdom is the greatest challenge. So, again, that middle part is the greatest challenge, but let's deal first with the personal. What I was trying to do when I went off to college and got 3 degrees was to become more knowledgeable. I didn't realize that I should have had to frame more as I was trying to be wiser. Certainly, over time, wisdom is possible for any of us over time. Wisdom shouldn't be seen as something just that if you get enough gray hair, then you're wise. It should not be seen that way. Wisdom should be seen as possible for young children if they are given enough opportunity to understand how to treat each other, etc. So wisdom should be seen as something that can be transmitted more effectively. But personal wisdom is always the next step to social wisdom. If only a few people are wise, social wisdom never really occurs because you don't have it spread enough. Wisdom needs to be more widespread. And then the external wisdom in terms of how are we treating the planet is badly missing. In the United States today, a huge portion of the American people do not believe in the climate crisis, global warming. And their leader is now the president. This is not a good thing. It is not a good thing. Here's one of the ideas for personal wisdom that if you haven't been exposed to, I recommend it highly. You can find more about it from Jim Sporer. Jim Sporer has written about it. It's an older idea than Jim's, goes back to Tim Brown at IDEO, the design company. They argue for a T-shape for humans, and so it takes a T apart on the left, that each person should have deep disciplinary knowledge and expertise. So the second part is breadth. And so together, that breadth and depth allows for the ability for people to work with each other better. Now, when I first saw the T-shape idea, I thought, I love that idea because that's part of the collaboration problem. If you only know how to talk to people who are trained in your discipline, you don't know how to talk to anybody else, you're going to be alone. So we need to build that breadth. Not that we're going to ignore the depth. The depth is important too, because the depth is how you contribute, but the bridge is how you share. So it's a wonderful metaphor for personal wisdom, I think. And in fact, Jim Sporer, in one of his articles, has actually touched on this as a wiser approach in what he's written. And I should add an additional comment. Jim Sporer is part of the board of directors of CeRCLe, a wonderful person. I got to meet him in 2006. He was actually a computer scientist by training. And he is a T-shaped person himself. He's a lot of fun to talk to because of that, because he and I do not have the same disciplinary training, but we know enough about what each other's doing to work together. Now, a couple more quotes. I showed you one quote from Nicholas Maxwell. One other quote, what does he say wisdom is? He says wisdom is being understood to be the capacity to realize what is of value in life for oneself and others. I like that quote. Another philosopher who works in wisdom, Howard Nussbaum, practical wisdom is decision-making in service of human flourishing. Notice how much that echoes what Jeremy Lent said about flourishing in the quote I showed you just a few slides back. So that flourishing issue, that what's of value for oneself and others, it's everybody. It fits with the collaboration logic I've been telling you about. That is wisdom, and that's why it needed to be part of CeRCLe's theory of change. So again, one more quote from Jeremy Lent, because like I said, I really love this book. Meaning is a function of connectedness. The more extensively we connect something with other aspects of our lives, the more meaningful it is to us. And I have to say, in my own personal experience, that is profoundly accurate. Meeting some of the European scholars that I met back in 1981 for the first time was tremendously helpful to me in understanding from their perspective, because we talked so much, how things were in their eyes versus my eyes. That connectedness, that connection is the essential. And that gives me one more reason to bring up that hierarchy of interactions, but I've noticed I've got some new labels on it. I've got those same labels you saw: conflict, competition, cooperation, and collaboration, but now I've added war, peace, and prosperity. That bottom part, sure, we understand that war is conflict. That's what's happening in Gaza and in Ukraine. there's a lot of discussion in the world about war and peace. We need to get peace. Peace is all there is. Give peace a chance. All those other sort of memes. I think peace is sort of a slip sliding back and forth between competition and cooperation. We have this body called the United Nations. Occasionally they're united, but typically they get into competitive situations and sometimes conflict breaks out amongst the members that are supposed to be united. So there's a slips back. Peace is hard to maintain because it is slippery going back and forth between competition and cooperation. A higher logic is the only way we escape that fate. So I think to get to prosperity for the planet, so that we're not ruining the planet, prosperity for the people, the humans that live on it, the 8 billion of us, collaboration to me is how we climb out of the ignorance of human history, the ignorance of war, and peace is not enough. Peace leaves us stuck on the edge of potential problems would be my logic. Different book that I recommend highly, and part of the reason why I'm so worried about the conditions of the world today. And a woman by the name of Gaia Vince wrote a book that I read a couple of years back called The Nomad Century, and here's the quote from her about climate migration. "We will, as refugees of nations, need collectively to transition to a sense of ourselves as citizens of Earth." And this is inspirational to Kosai and I because we're working on Citizens of Earth as I'm telling you this. "We will need to shed some of our tribal identities to embrace a pan-species identity. We will need to assimilate into globally diverse societies living in new polar societies." Now that I've read that quote, how likely does that seem today to be possible? It does not seem very likely because all over the world where refugees have needed to move, they're being shunned, mistreated, etc. It's not unique to the United States. It's not unique to Europe. Refugees have always had problems in the world. We need to be good as a species in accepting the need to migrate because of climate issues, as well as political issues, war, etc. There's all kinds of reasons we should accept the fact there's only one species on the planet. We're all part of the same species, and we should respect each other because of it. Again, that's respecting diversity. Climate change. And notice that last phrase, polar cities. I emphasize that in black. She's serious. She's convinced that the middle part of the planet will become uninhabitable. It's a disturbing thought. Rethinking and reorganizing knowledge systems to become wisdom systems, then, is my point here. Service is pervasive because it's embedded in human needs for human interaction. Disciplines emerge to pursue specific knowledge. Disciplines have an old history. Marketing is a relatively recent discipline. It was about customers, which was a new idea in the business schools. It eventually, business got to customers. And service research has many homes, but there isn't a service discipline. I've actually called service a discipline in the past, but I haven't done it for 5 years because I realized I was wrong. I think we should celebrate the fact that we don't have a service discipline. We're undisciplined. We don't have the change that disciplines can cause. You can't do that. It's not part of our discipline and thinking. So I think we should retain that condition and help liberate our fellow humans by connecting to people. They might have a disciplinary home. Remember that T-shape? They might have their depth in a discipline, but they need the breadth to work with each other. We need, as a species, the breadth to work with each other, to help each other. We need an integrated perspective on serving humanity. And I've got 4 categories of that just to use some buckets for things. We need things like service management, service engineering, service arts, and service science as 4 possible buckets. Jim Sporer helped create those buckets, by the way, but he collapsed them by accident into just service science. It wasn't Jim's fault completely. It was because it was easier to say just service science instead of including the others. But I think we should, instead of thinking about disciplines, we should think about what's the purpose of these fields. If it has anything to do with humans, it should be serving humans. It should be the wisdom of serving humanity. So, bringing it back to CeRCLe in these last parts, CeRCLe seeks to become a community platform for networking and resource sharing. We're working to encourage collaborative community building projects in any sphere of human service systems. This is something Kosai and I have been talking a lot about, and in fact, we're eager to work with your center on that very topic of collaborative building projects in any sphere of human service systems. This means social systems, anything with social systems. This means economic systems. It means political systems. We want to help any service system practice collaboration instead of conflict, competition, or mainly cooperating. So the community idea, community platform, the networking idea is really one that is in the early days as an experiment. But I think it's going to be a powerful way of helping connect people to each other. Those 7 service research themes that I showed you, this is from the diagram from the article that Sertan and I and Radula and Kareem wrote on collaboration. That was number 7 of the series. We asked our designer to put them together in a circle with collaboration in the center so that researchers working on well-being understand the need to collaborate. Researchers working on opportunity understand all the way around that circle and that we understand the way to work together. Our logic was that if we could get enough researchers doing that, collaborating across all those areas, we could really get things moving faster. So for you as scholars, who could you collaborate with in your school, your country, and the world to work on that kind of idea, anywhere in that set of 7 circles? And together you could pursue a collaborative wisdom research project that serves humanity. There are literally thousands and thousands of possibilities. I would encourage you for any of them to try to think of it at a broader level and then find a starting point at a specific level. You can't solve all the world's problems today. None of us can, but together we can get things moving. Again, that's learned optimism. Learned optimism is how we get out of the ignorance of the past. CeRCLe Lab's call to action is this quote. This is actually from the wisdom article I showed you earlier. Service researchers should adopt wisdom as a primary topic and accept the challenge of propagating wiser research, wiser practice, wiser societies. Enabling wiser service systems facilitates shared purposes, collaborative communication practices, and emergent wisdom. That phrase emergent wisdom is really important to us because wisdom emerges from working together. You can't always be sure what the wisdom is until you work together to find it. They're discoveries for solving the shared problems of humanity. Our species is born ignorant, but we don't have to stay ignorant. CeRCLe believes service researchers are uniquely positioned to help accelerate human progress. And as you can see on the right there, it's because we see service systems. That was not true when I started in the service research field back in 1980, but it is now that service dominant logic, service science area, we can see that the planet Earth, the only known planet with life, has service systems on it. And if we can see it, we should do something about it. If scholars can see the problem before the public can, I think scholars, we have a duty as humans to act. I think we have that duty because the rest don't have the wisdom or the knowledge to see it. Next slide here is, can we rise above our perilous times? It can be difficult to be optimistic in our perilous times. And I had another one of my pessimism crises 2 days ago. I'm getting over it. But again, it's that challenge that we see in human systems, that things can look bad and pessimism will never solve anything. CeRCLe is optimistic by design, and I've told you why. It's because that's how I learned to cope with 1968. Every time things like what happened yesterday and Tuesday happen, it's like deja vu all over again in terms of my experiences in 68. I think, oh no, it's happened again. It's not the same, but things happen in similar ways. While human service systems are fragile, we can collaborate wisely to design our service systems to serve humanity wisely. And this next sentence is, to me, one of the key reasons I started CeRCLe Lab too. Many humans and many human organizations share a collective yearning to find solutions to these service system problems. That was shown in some of the books that I just quoted from, the wisdom books, Jeremy Lent's book. A desire to solve these problems. We can become wiser together. That's collaborative wisdom. We can, I think, our species can become Homo sapiens if we work together at it. And I have to share one other quote, because I started with a Bob Marley quote, and I have to finish with a Steve Jobs quote a little bit later in life. At the Stanford commencement ceremony, and he's not a college graduate, but in his talk, he said this is the closest he'd ever been to a college and graduation. He said, "Don't be trapped by dogma." That's in the quote, but let me read the whole quote. "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma." And then he defines it according to him, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the voice of other people's opinion drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. That word courage to me is a particularly powerful word because I might give you an example from my father. My father would tell me whenever I would start to complain about something, he would say to me, no one ever said doing the right thing is supposed to be easy. So I've been doing hard things my whole life. We should all do hard things to help each other. It's easy to just sit there on the sidelines and say someone should do something about it. But to really escape that fate, and this is what CeRCLe is trying to help encourage, to help us all escape those fates of working together. You already know how to get involved with CeRCLe, but I always leave these slides in the back of anything I present. So that's all the possible ways. And I should emphasize here that I've already sent these slides to COSI so you can share them with everybody. And I've also got the slide here to give you a reminder of that phrase, serve it forward. What I'm always hoping whenever I tell anybody anything about what we're doing in CeRCLe, that they will see it as a way to, and a reason to share with other people. So we'll get these recordings shared with you as well. And now we get to, I guess, switch the cameras back, and I'm happy to interact with you and discuss anything you want to ask or discuss with me. So let me now turn back